the problem with narrow thinking is when you're thinking too solely about any outcome, it makes it so that any person is going to discount and potentially ignore other values that are important in life. And one of those values that could be ignored is ethical conduct.
Welcome to the Leadership Initiative, where we explore the art and science of leadership through thought-provoking conversations with experts, thought leaders, and change makers. Whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting out on your leadership journey, this podcast is designed to provide you with the tools and inspiration you need to lead with purpose and make a meaningful difference.
In today's episode, Ben Tepper sits down with Rebecca Greenbaum, Associate Dean and Professor in the School of Management and Labor Relations at Rutgers University. Rebecca received her PhD from the University of Florida, and this discussion covers her journey from working as a claims adjuster at Progressive and how her corporate experiences inspired her research ideas. The two dive deep into Rebecca's seminal work on bottom line mentality, exploring its effects on ethical conduct and the fascinating idea of narrow thinking as a strategic short-term tool. So let's get to it.
The very quick version of my history, I suppose. I was born in Nashua, New Hampshire, which is considered a suburb of Boston, Massachusetts. It's on the line there. Then I moved to Maine. When I was 8, I landed in Florida, graduated high school from there, and got into the University of Florida. There I was a business administration major right from the beginning. My major was finance. My professors at the University of Florida told me, go in to get some work experience before you apply to graduate school, just because you want to really make sure that that's the right choice for you. And so I did. I went and worked in the insurance industry as a claims adjuster for 2 years. I'm actually first generation high school, so my parents didn't even graduate from high school, which I always like to add that to my story just to show other students and other people how far you can come if you're set up with indicators of success around you and you seize those opportunities. But because I didn't have those role models in my home, I really needed these external role models to tell me, hey, look, you can become a professor. In my undergraduate career, there was enough people around me who intrigued me enough to say, oh, I think I might want to get a doctorate. One was just a friend she came from parents who went to college. She was at Boston College, and she said, I might get a PhD. And she never did, but just hearing her say that, knowing that she and I were similar academically, I thought, oh, maybe I can do that. One of my best friends in undergrad, her mother was a MD, but a researcher. So I had her as an example. And then my professors, their lifestyles just sounded really awesome. So I went and worked for 2 years, and I could not run quicker back to academia because I did not like the structure that was imposed on me with respect to a corporate job and the expectations there. I think I'm a little bit more entrepreneurial at heart. So I started to apply to PhD programs. I did not have a master's yet. I already lived in Central Florida. I owned a house with the person who became my husband. I just applied to Central Florida because we already lived there. And Ryan, my husband, he continued to work at Progressive Insurance, which is where I had worked as well. And at that time, Central Florida was actually only admitting doctoral students every other year. And so I got lucky. The year that I applied, they were taking applicants, and I guess they liked me enough. But what I didn't realize at that time was how perfect that department was for me at Central Florida, just because all of my ideas centered on what I would consider under a large umbrella of unethical leadership. So when I entered Central Florida, which was in 2005, we had a lot of people engaging in ethics research, ethical leadership in particular. Dave Mayer was doing a lot of that research. But then my main advisor, Rob Folger, was a justice scholar, or he really looked at more of the moral side of unfairness within organizations, which gelled with a lot of what I was interested in. My ideas actually came from the corporate world, which we'll talk about that in a bit, but my research ideas were very much from my experience working in insurance. So that's how I landed at Central Florida. Once I graduated from there, I got my first assistant professor job at Oklahoma State. We lived there for 9 years. And then as my children were getting older, I wanted to get settled before they got into middle school. And I knew that I didn't want to live in rural America for too long. It was a great place to start my career. It truly was. To have my children, I have 4 kids. It was great. And I loved my department. I was totally set up for success, but I'm just not a rural person. I just wanted more access to cultural opportunities, good restaurants, things like that. So I only applied to urban areas, and Rutgers was hiring, the School of Management and Labor Relations. I applied there into a couple of other positions, had 3 interviews, and Rutgers is where I landed. I've been there for 6.5 years now. For the past 3 years, I've been the associate dean. The short version of that is I was kind of getting bored with research through the pandemic because most of the teaching was being done online, if not all of it, with pre-recorded videos. So I wasn't in the classroom. I felt like I was only writing in addition to trying to manage my 4 children who were at home, which was an additional stressor. But I think I get bored a little bit easily. And my dean asked me at the right time. And I said, you know what? I think I would want to go into administration someday, but I don't know if I would like it. And so I said, why don't I just sign a 2-year contract to see if I like it? The first year was pretty taxing just because I was trying to figure out the job. And so I did not think I would want to extend the contract. But then there was a turning point right around that year mark where I said, you know what? I can actually see how I can make a big difference in this role. So I extended my contract for another 1.5 years or 3.5 years total. And I'm finishing out my contract now. I do intend at some point to go back into administration and to move up the ranks, but at this point in my life, I just want to go back to being a professor for 3 to 5 years and then maybe seek out. I just feel like once I go all in administration, I'll really truly be all in, and I'm not quite ready for that right now, even though I like it. So that's where I am. I'm an associate dean. I'm still doing some research. I'm still teaching. I love everything I do. I'm spread a little too thin right now, I would say, but at the same time, I'm plugging along.
Absolutely. Well, there's so much about your story and your thinking that sounds familiar to me. That's amazing. Okay, so let us talk a little bit about bottom line mentality. So you started to talk about where that idea came from. Please fill in the gaps there.
So it's not like I was sitting around Progressive Insurance thinking about this new concept that, it wasn't anything like that. But when I landed at Central Florida, it was truly within the first weeks that I had my first meeting with Rob Folder, who became my dissertation chair, and I was immediately assigned to him. And I started to talk to him about unethical leadership. And he said to me, so this was 2005, he said, not much has been done on that. And I remember thinking to myself, what? Just because it seems like, how could the management literature not have really done much in the area of unethical leadership, just because it seems like it was everywhere? And so we started to talk about some of the experiences I had at Progressive. And what I thought was interesting is I did not necessarily think my leaders were flat out like unethical, like embezzling money, but they engaged in a lot of shady behaviors. And my idea didn't related to bottom line mentality. It didn't come immediately, but through a number of different conversations across that first year, Rob, he had a totally different way than a lot of academics in terms of generating ideas. He very much believed, and this is how I teach my students today, that it's not that you shouldn't pay attention to what existing literature says. I mean, that's important at some point, but he always encouraged me to start with my own ideas first, because his thinking was, if you actually do these thought experiments on your own, you're going to have a unique take on something. So why bias yourself by going into the literature first? Think first. And then if I experienced something, there's a good chance other people are experiencing that too, in which case it could become potentially generalizable. But then once you have more of this solid idea of what you think is interesting, go to the literature to see if it's been done yet. So we would spend sometimes 3 hours with him drawing all over the board, really like exhausting but enlightening meetings, I would say. And at one point, we started to narrow in on this idea of what I saw, I think, within Progressive is that many of the leaders there, it's not like abusive supervision, what you researched, where they were mistreating us. They actually treated the employees really, really well, but their behavior was a little shady because it was so driven by the outcomes that were tied to profits. Everything was about hitting the numbers to save money, to support profits. As an example, we were expected, one of our metrics that we were supposed to meet was when someone was in a car accident, we were supposed to go meet with them within 2 hours of the car accident to get them to sign a release. So that way they could not come back to the insurance company to claim any more money related to their medical care. I thought that was shady because sometimes 2 hours after an accident, you don't even really know if you're injured yet. So that didn't seem like a good practice to me. In defense of the insurance company, though, I do understand why they did that. So I kind of like to give a nod to Progressive a little bit to say it's not that they were totally bad. At least in Central Florida, there was a lot of fraud. And people were really just looking for big payouts from the insurance company. And I actually did do a little bit of research, cited your work actually, on customer unethical behavior at some point, but that wasn't something that I really ended up taking off for me with my research identity. It was more of this idea of bottom line mentality. And then once I started to get into this topic of what is it like when people become so focused on the numbers, I usually say that the numbers or these outcomes, these bottom line outcomes within corporate or for-profit organizations, it's usually tied to profits, whether you're solely focused on your performance, your sales quotas, whatever. It's usually in some way either to support the organizations or your own profit and financial well-being. Though, as we discussed, my vision of that has expanded through time. And I think it results in, it's essentially narrow thinking. But I package it together in this idea of bottom line mentality. And the problem with narrow thinking is when you're thinking too solely about any outcome, it makes it so that any person is going to discount and potentially ignore other values that are important in life. And one of those values that could be ignored is ethical conduct. I don't pay attention in the example of Progressive as to whether or not this customer is really hurt and should not sign the release. I'm just going to ask them to sign it because the only thing that matters to me right now is hitting those numbers because it's going to help me. I'm going to get a bonus, and then therefore it's going to help the organization.
Fascinating. Can I ask you something? You've incorporated this in your teaching? Do you talk about it well, I mean, you're not teaching now, or not as much, but when you were teaching more, did you talk about this concept? And if
I
so,
did, especially when I teach ethics, I do talk about it. It's related to this dysfunction associated with the way organizations reward. And so it is tied into other concepts or ideas that already exist within the ethics literature, but I still explain to my students some of the nuances that I see with bottom line mentality that make it its own unique thing. So yes, I have taught about it. My students hear me talk about it a lot. I wouldn't say that it's probably no more than one class that I talk about this idea, maybe 1.5, just because I do talk about it throughout the semester. So yes.
yeah, I mean, do they resonate to it? It's just, I remember reading about it for the first time. I thought, yeah, sometimes, you read something, you're like, I don't know. But then you read other things, you're like, oh yeah, absolutely.
It's so easy. Well, what's interesting, I think over the years, I've gotten you always get pushback, right? And I remember at Oklahoma State, one of my colleagues kept saying, why do you call it bottom line mentality? Because in his mind, of course, corporations are going to care about the bottom line. And so that's a good thing. And so to him, the name wasn't resonating in terms of it being potentially dysfunctional. But actually, me and my co-authors, those of us who really study this the most, we actually think that this way of thinking, especially as an activated cognitive state, is more of a tool that people use in order to secure the outcomes that are important to them. And it can be functional. So it's not all dysfunctional. It can be functional if used in the short term. I see it with myself all the time. And it's similar to goal shielding. You've heard that theory, and we've paired it with that theory where in order to hit a goal, you basically ignore distracting content to hit that goal. And I'd say in the short term, that might be pretty effective. I don't go to my kids' field hockey game. I decide not to make dinner. I just order pizza instead. And I'm ignoring all these other things that I want to do for my life, usually to make it fulfilling. But it's because I have this deadline that I'm trying to hit. And maybe you do that for a week and it's okay. But if this is your only mentality and it's the way that you always operate in an organization, it can lead to unethical conduct. But yeah, I mean, I think it does resonate with people. People say yes. I mean, of course, like I remember talking to you maybe after your review piece came out. I forget how long it was ago, but it was a while ago, where we wondered, did you think that abusive supervision was getting to a saturation point, and you were like, no way. Like, I remember you were very confident there's a lot more research to be done because you were so immersed in it. This was at least 10 years ago. And then I feel that way now too, just because to me, the concept has expanded beyond, it's maybe getting away from the core of how I originally conceptualized bottom line mentality, but I'm very, very interested in this idea of narrow thinking and how that narrow thinking is both helpful, which I think is really important, but then extremely dysfunctional in some instances too. So you can try to balance that. And yes, I think that people generally, when I fully describe what it is, they understand it. Some people don't fully understand why it's dysfunctional though. So that's why I have to really explain the definition and how it's about ignoring other considerations or discounting those, because without that, people wouldn't really see it as being dysfunctional, I don't think.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess maybe I see that now. When I first saw the term, I just thought what you were capturing is that excluding, and that's the exclusion of other things, right? You're just so focused on it that other considerations that we know to be important, just they don't rise to the top of mind. So you've already started talking a little bit about where you think things could go next. Have you had a chance to think much about that? Like, so when you get your 3 to 5 years back, are you gonna look at this? And if so, are there some pressing questions that you can talk about here?
Yes, we just got published in Journal of Management a review piece on bottom line mentality. I don't know if it's still in press or if it's finally like printed 2024, I can't remember. But so as a result of writing that, I was able to give me and my co-authors, Mary Moritz, and then my doctoral students, an author on that one too, Nazifa Zaman. We really were able to give a lot of thought to like where we want to see the construct go. I will tell you what I'm most excited about is if you or anyone else were to pull that piece, you would see that the majority of the research on bottom line mentality has been examined as a leadership construct, and that was never really my intention.
Okay.
I'm even thinking, I'm trying to think of my dissertation or I guess my earliest paper, it had both employee bottom line mentality and supervisor bottom line mentality, but for some reason the supervisor bottom line mentality part really took off. But what me and Mary Moritz, she and I talk about this a lot at length. What we really find the most fascinating is the fact that people might use this, as I started to suggest to you, as a tool, or they may engage in bottom line mentality, maybe even temporarily, just as a result of their circumstances that are going on. So we see it as more of this activated cognitive state. And the research that I'm working on right now is trying to examine it as that, because I think if you see it as an activated cognitive state and something that you don't maybe use all the time, but you use it sometimes, would you then be able to better parse out the instances or those conditions, or maybe even just, when perhaps this could result in better outcomes for you as a person or the organization versus dysfunctional outcomes. My doctoral student and I have a paper, and it's a revise and resubmit right now at Personnel Psychology. Mary's on this paper as well. But we are looking at family financial pressure and how we're using threat rigidity theory to suggest that family financial pressure can give you this anxious state, so an emotional reaction. And then if you use that anxiety and channel it into something like a cognitive state of bottom line mentality, we find that it drives positive outcomes in terms of trying to restabilize your financial situation. And we use threat rigidity theory, which if you were to look at that theory, it has a lot of similarities to bottom line mentality. So we're pairing the two together because it basically says that when you're under threat, you have this anxious response, and then it results in a constriction of your mindset towards what is the most important for alleviating that threat. And it actually notes in there that when you get this very, very narrow mindset on, I need to deal with this threat, you do ignore other things because the most important thing is dealing with the threat. And so we see bottom line mentality as pairing with family financial pressure. And so we see that as a strategy that can be used because you're so focused on your bottom line outcomes that focus could potentially result in higher performance metrics that would help the financial outcome. So anyway, I didn't mean to get so specific about a study, but we want to do more research on that. One of my that's 3 or 4 years I'm going to get back when I'm not associate dean anymore. I would love to write a book. And so I've started to think through what I would potentially put in that book. Because I see this narrow thinking in so many areas of life, and it probably gets a little bit outside of the bottom line mentality territory. I am interested in understanding how identity effects, like when people have threatened identities of some sort, how that potentially can lead them to be so protective of, and they have this strong desire to reestablish whatever threatened identity that might be, that it could lead to this narrow thinking. It may not be bottom line mentality in the traditional sense that I define it, but it could still be this very narrow thinking that leads to dysfunctional outcomes. All of those ideas are still percolating, so I can't really speak to them in a very deep way at this point, but I just feel like there's so many interesting things that could be said on the topic.
I absolutely agree with you. By the way, your paper's out, and I know this because I've assigned it to my PhD students. They'll be reading that in Dysfunctional and Ethical Leadership Week.
Oh, good. Well, I'm so excited that they're reading it. Well, then you can remind me what I said is the future of BLM. You know how that is. You like have all these good ideas, and then it's like, okay, what did I say?
You got me thinking, and this is in a way off the narrative here, but have you looked at it as a dependent variable? Like, is there things that you could do to trigger it? Okay, I'll stop. You're nodding your head.
No, yeah, yes, we have. It just hasn't been looked at as a DB very much.
Yeah.
Or like we're positioning it more as a mediator, and not just because we see it as a, as I said, this cognitive state or way of being. So then we do end up tacking on some type of outcome. I think the reason why Mary and I say Mary because she's been my main co-author over the years. I think the reason why we always want to look at outcomes is we're still trying to disentangle the benefits and drawbacks. Most early research was overwhelmingly this mentality is dysfunctional even to performance. But then as you start to add more complexity to the models in terms of moderators or looking at different mediating effects, we start to see, well, no, actually, even if it's indirect, it seems like bottom line mentality can have an association with positive outcomes. So that's why I think we just haven't looked at BLM as an outcome itself yet.
Is there, when you're teaching students, is there a myth that they hold to that kind of strikes you and you think to yourself, wow, I really need to educate my students about this thing, that like there's a belief, there's a practice, there's a management thing. You know what I mean?
Like a way that the students think
about things, or there's a belief that they have about how management works or what doesn't work, what's good, what's bad. Is there anything that comes to mind? And it could be in any area, but if there was something in the ethics area, something related to the research you do.
Right. You got me there. I'm trying to think. Maybe it's because I'm teaching an honors seminar to undergraduate students right now. So they're writing research papers. So I'm trying to think of some things that they just think are common sense. Like this is one that flusters me a bit, I suppose. So I don't know if it's answering your question directly, but sometimes the critical thinking of the students isn't quite there, and they're like, okay, I'm going to couch this in an example. Like, I think that every student from the East Coast of the United States should do a study abroad, but not go abroad, just stay in the United States and go to Central Oklahoma as an example. And I'm kind of like being silly here. And then at the same time, I think these Oklahoman students should come to the East Coast. And let me explain what I mean by that is that sometimes their beliefs and their general thoughts about the world are like so obvious to them that they have a really hard time thinking from a different perspective. And it lacks, sometimes their thought lacks a bit of diversity. Like as an example, I do some of the same ethics assignments when I taught ethics at Oklahoma State. I would have them debate a moral topic, and I would encourage them to make it a business-ish, moral dilemma type of topic that they wanted to debate, like minimum wage or something like that. But I would also say, like, what's more important to me is that you think complexly about this issue and understand the two sides of the issue. So if you want to go outside of the scope of management, I would allow that. And sometimes they would choose topics related to anti-abortion, pro-life, pro-choice, that topic. When I was in Oklahoma, it was so obvious to the students that, of course, everybody would be pro-life. Then I landed in New Jersey, and it was the exact opposite to where they thought they were going to accidentally offend someone because the majority was so pro-choice. And it was just the opposite mentality. And it really, like, you're taking these people who are the same age, the same generation, and they have these really strong convictions that are totally different. And I really think it's just a function of them living somewhere that's different, right? And there is steeped in, the cultural values of those reasons or those areas. And so sometimes I think that's just an example. I'm not making this political at all. It's just an example of how they just sometimes think things are no-brainers. So like diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a really, really important topic. And it's been something that we've been really focusing a lot on at Rutgers as well. And it is an amazingly important topic, but this does relate to how I think of bottom line mentality. If that becomes the only initiative, then what is being left behind if you're so solely focused on only promoting this? And sometimes I think in the classroom, students will have those thoughts like, this needs to be the most important issue no matter what, whether it's diversity, whether it's being, pro-choice, and it suggests more of this kind of narrower way of thinking. And I always tell my students when I'm teaching ethics, it's like, I'm not in the business of changing what's important to you and what you consider to be right. I don't want to do that. But I do think it's my job to expose you to different perspectives. So that way, even if you don't change the way that you think about something, you can understand in a more complex way, why someone else might have a different view. I think that's so fundamentally important to this world right now, just to at least see where people are coming from. But then when it comes to more of the business landscape, realizing you have to keep multiple priorities in balance. You can't shift, whether it's like, I'm only going to care about employees. That's not good either, because you have to have money in order to thrive, right? And so this again gets back to bottom line mentality, where the bottom line outcome may not be finances, it could be something else. But if you elevate that one priority as being absolutely the most important thing, something else is going to give, because you're not being multidimensional. And not textbook, I want it to be just like a regular book that I want to write about. I plan to get into that too. Like, I think people default to this narrow way of thinking in a lot of areas of their life because it's simpler, it's easier. It is really hard to wrestle with issues, especially morally intense issues. And it's easier just not to think about how someone in Oklahoma might think differently to you and why, right? And again, I don't want to come across as I would ever want to change someone's opinions. I mean, I might, but that wouldn't be my intent. It's more just getting people to think more dynamically. And it saddens me when I feel like that doesn't happen enough. So
Wow,
that was a very long response. So
that was awesome. I didn't expect that, but that was awesome. And oh my God, there's so much that you said that I'm glad I'm taping it, because I'm going to have to go back and remind myself of all of it. That thing about doing a study abroad, but within the country. I mean, on the eve of the election that's coming up, this is the divide, isn't it? That's
exactly.
it. Narrow thinking from two different parts of the US, and you aren't necessarily going to, learn how to overcome that by going to France, right?
Exactly. I had written an op-ed after the last election. Maybe it was 2 elections ago. It was in the heart of the pandemic, and it was called "Why Did Grandma Vote for Trump?" And it was because of this, like, my family with the diversity and educational backgrounds. A lot of my family did not necessarily go to college, and they just come from, they're different than academics. That's all I'm going to say. They're just different. So I wrote this just because I was trying to put some understanding behind it for those, especially in this region, who may not fully understand. And that really bothered me too, like the automatic assumption that everybody who's Republican is racist, and that's extreme thinking, right? If there's anything that's going to bother me more than it's when people who are, again, not trying to make it too political, but liberal, don't even realize how narrow their thinking is, right? Just because they're not really fully understanding the complexity of someone else's thinking. So yeah, there's so much that can be said and dissected. And right. I'm going to be in England during this election. I did vote by mail.
Uh,
That's
Good for you. Good for you. I'm going to tell you something. I have a feeling that we're going to be making two blog posts out of this because there was just too much good stuff. I thank you. I don't know if there any way I could ever help you, but if you can ever think of something, you just let me know.
I think you've helped me enough over the years. Your research has been
If
inspiring.
you
I'm
say
just glad to
so.
have this chat. It's fun.
If
So
you say so. Well, thank you, Rebecca. I really appreciate it. And good luck to you with everything you're doing.
Thanks again for listening. This podcast is presented by the Max M. Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University. For more episodes, find us on Apple, Google, or podcast.osu.edu/leadership initiative. See you next time.